Hello, my fellow kin. Welcome back to the channel and welcome to another pro player interview. I'm joined today by a very special guest, Mr. Tom Hamshire, over from the UK, who just finished placing first at the Incursions event 40k singles GT with what I think is one of the coolest and funnest Votann lists I've seen. Super excited to talk about this one. Absolutely honored to have him on the channel for an interview. Mr. Tom Hamshire, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good. It's a pleasure to be here. We're calling in from the sunny south coast of England,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, like I said, really happy to be here and chat about the list and how some of the games went.
Absolutely appreciate it, man. I really thank you for coming on. And yes, you are talking to me from the UK, where it is very nice and sunny, apparently. And I am over here freezing to death, drinking a hot coffee, staring at the snow outside my window. So very envious, and also very
Yeah.
happy. So a bittersweet moment here on this call.
If anyone's familiar with the UK, there's a group of lads with their shirts off now that it's hit like 16 degrees walking past my window.
Nice. uh,
Obviously day drinking, but
Yeah, obviously
yeah,
day drinking. Yeah, of course. I respect that. I envy the lifestyle. It's on
it's
my
strong on
agenda
a
to come
Sunday
visit.
afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Tom, I guess I'm just wondering, so like how new are you to the competitive scene? Have you been playing Warhammer for a while? What was kind of like your entry like into this amazing hobby?
Yeah, I think similar to quite a lot of people in the hobby, I played a little bit as a kid, uh, and then sort of later in life, I've gotten back into it. So I've been there's a big scene in Brighton, and when we moved down to Brighton in the UK about 18 months, just through meeting some people and trying to try some new hobbies, got back into 40k, and I'm a very competitive person, so almost immediately started playing competitively. But
Nice.
I wasn't always a Votann player. In fact, it's quite a recent development. I usually play Drukari, which is a bit of a mask off reveal. I'm a villain. But I think that there's a lot of similarities between Drukari and Votann. There's a lot of differences too, but the similarities that drew me to Votann with the most recent balance data slate because Drukari got gutted. I don't know
Hmm.
if you saw the nerfs, but my like comp list went up like 220
Oh
points.
my God. Yeah, that's a
And
slaughter.
it's not like the faction was super great before then. We were doing all right, and I played competitively quite a lot, and I had won some events with Drukari in the UK. But
Hmm.
it's it can be quite a tough going, and you often feel like you really have to outplay somebody, or somebody has to make a mistake. And I feel like one of the fundamental differences with moving to Votann is instead of like playing an opponent, at least with a list like I run, really play against the scoreboard more than anything. And
Hmm.
I'm a big fan of the fast MSU Votann at the minute.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So there's a there's a meme I keep seeing online about Drukari, just a side note, but it's that every time there's a Meta Monday and Drukari's at like a 40% win rate or something, it's like, oh, thanks to Skari, we'll get more nerfs. So it's just all the nerfs are directed
Yeah,
at Skari.
I'd been running the bombers, and Scary started taking them, doing well with them, and I just knew that they were going to go
Just
up.
sell your stock. As soon as Skari touches a model, sell
Yeah,
whatever you have.
exactly. You know that it's going up 20, 30 points in the next data slate.
Yeah, yeah. I also
Someone in
found.
GW is sick of losing to Scary.
Oh my god, yeah, absolutely. They're tired. They're like anything this man touches, take it off the shelf. I also thought it was really interesting. We were talking about this a little bit before we went live, but when I was looking at this list, it does scream Drukari to me. Like I see a very clear parallel between like the archetype here that was built. Very MSU, very vehicle heavy, and of course for the viewers, we'll talk about the list in just a moment. But I see a lot of inspiration from that play style over here in this list, which I think is really cool. Yeah, I was excited for it because I also had started a Drukari army maybe like 8 months ago, 6 to 8 months ago, I would say. And I fell in love with the play style. I love the idea of, I think it was Sky Splinter, where it's like you interact with your vehicles on the go, you're very fast, you're very cheap units, dump OC on objectives, things like that. And I couldn't settle on a paint scheme. I found they were very difficult as like a hobby angle to like work with, and I just ended up selling them. I couldn't find something I was happy with. A lot of the models are tough to find for some reason too, like they just don't exist anymore. So I
Yeah.
thought it was a nightmare to get into.
You have to accept when you play Drukari that everything is going to be painful. That's the whole vibe. From acquiring the models that GW haven't sold in a decade to, actually painting and playing with the damn things. They're so spiky. I can't tell you how many times they've drawn blood at an event by the like game 5 when I'm knackered and not handling models properly. But
I see. Yes,
yeah,
they're thematic.
yeah, that's part of the theme. That's part of the immersion with them, and the suffering at the tabletop is all part of that too. Is they're so fragile that
Mm,
they're very unforgiving of mistakes. But yeah, transferring to Votann, big step up in durability. I'm
hmm.
used to my Venoms being like T6 and 6 wounds
Yeah.
and 1 OC. So getting to play with Sagittars is a pretty incredible thing.
Yeah, I believe
And
you.
yeah, so lots more durability. The chaff is all T5 instead of T3. So yeah, and again, I'm quite used to with Drukari having loads of dark lances, which are powerful but quite swingy. So
Hmm.
if you want to kill something with shooting, you have to make sure that you've got some contingencies and everything's lined up on multiple things that it can potentially shoot. And I found that I run all 6 of my Sagittars with casino cannons.
Hmm.
So I find that is really quite a similar experience to bringing like 20 Dark Lancers in a list.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I know a lot of people like running a nice mix if they're taking 6. They like taking some of the stable 3 damage ones versus the high lives, and I've kind of flip flopped back and forth between this, but in my experience of playing with the 3 damage one a little bit now, I think I'm just gonna go back to all high lives because people respect you a lot more. They can't predict how much your max damage output is gonna be, and so because of that, they're a little bit more afraid. Like conversely, you have to, like you said, have a lot more contingencies in place because sometimes it just completely backfires and your whole army ends up doing like 6 damage total out of like 5 Sagittars. So
Yeah.
I definitely agree with you. Very swingy, and I see the parallels here. So when you migrated over from Drukari to Votann, was it really just because of these, like the similarity in playstyle, but the better, not necessarily better stat line, but the more favorable stat line for what you were looking for? Was there something more about like the overall theme of Votann that pulled you in? What got you
Yeah,
interested in the army?
it was definitely more thematic that was initially drawing me to the army. I think I started collecting them towards the end of summer last year.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I really like the theme, the like ruthless industrialists that are gonna strip mine your planet, but
Yeah,
also have these like cute AI friends that they hang out
they're
with.
so cute.
The Yeah, it strikes like the right amount of grimdark while also being an interesting and thematically different faction. And I love dwarves in any sort of fantasy setting. So
Mm-hmm.
they were my army back in when I used to play the old world for Warhammer. I very much like the vibe that like corrupted AI cores that are slowly going mad, and
Yes.
the whole army's like a clone race.
Yeah, yeah.
It pushed the buttons for me with a nice theme. They're nice and easy to paint.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of lads down in Brighton are collecting Votann at the moment. So there's seeing a lot of people play with them and do quite well on the tabletop, but just I had a good grip on the style of
Mm-hmm.
lots of transports, high OC. Everything's got objective secured, just like in Drukari. At least the battle line does. So
Yeah.
the definitely initially thematic, but really vibed with the play style as well.
Nice, nice. It's good to hear that it resonated with you just like across all mediums. I think that's like a super important part of this game as well. Like a lot of people I know, it's like you pick the army that's very competitive, the army that's very viable, but I feel like you get more out of the army if you actually enjoy collecting it and enjoy playing with it outside of just the rules. And it's nice to hear that there is something here that spoke to you too, just thematically out of the army and like how it positions itself in the narrative and in the lore, which is very
Yeah,
cool.
very cool. And I like that there's aspects of that, the best factions for me do a good job of implementing the lore into the game.
Hmm.
And everybody loves that's a grudging when someone, something kills
Yeah.
something. The theme of you going in the book of grudges and this one unit has performed particularly well, so the rest of the army is a little bit extra motivated to get them as the game goes on, and the the endurance and the doggedly holding on to things as your sticky objective or your sergeant on that 4 wound invon, pops off and saves a couple of saves at key moments, or that feel no pain 6-up kicks in. It's there's a lot of the thematically their character represented in the game that I quite like.
Yeah, I agree. Nice little tough, durable, swarmy little dwarves.
Yeah, exactly. The massive footprint we get, especially with a list like mine, that's just I start basically everything on the board almost every game, and gum up the mid board with Jaegers, and then massive scout moves. It feels like the surge of industry and this overwhelming tide of
For capitalism.
yeah, exactly. You're going to get strip mined. So yeah, it's I like the way they play, and I like the way that ties into their backstory.
Nice, cool. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this event, the Incursion events, 40K singles GT. So you said you've been in the competitive scene now for quite a bit of time. I take it this is not your first GT. So you attended this one here. It was I believe, 22-person event, 25?
Yeah, 22 participants for this one.
Okay, nice.
And it's a regular set of events that a guy that we know quite well runs. They're super professionally run, fantastic vibe, great space. So yeah, we quite like the Incursion events. I've been to, I think, 4 of the GTs there now, and I have placed reasonably well, but I've not won any of them before.
Nice. Okay, cool. And was this using UKTC terrain? I imagine yes.
Yeah, UKTC terrain and missions.
Okay, cool.
So slightly different from what you guys.
Yes, I went ahead before we chatted and took a look at the map pack. I pulled it up here just for reference because I'm super admittedly unfamiliar with UKTC. I've seen it in a couple battle reports on YouTube, like Vanguard Tactics used it in a few games. I've seen it on Art of War, but never actually saw it in real life or like into like from an analytical perspective. So I pulled up the map pack here, and it is quite different from what I'm used to seeing. The footprints are different shapes, which is interesting to see. Some of them are quite tiny as well. Just so you have like these big L ruins that have a small footprint. How would you say, just to like contextualize everything we're going to be talking about, like how would you say the terrain set plays versus something like WTC or GW, like just for a little bit of context for the viewers?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is melee isn't quite as strong because it's not as easy to hide bodies behind ruins in a way that's like impossible to dig out with shooting, and you have to go and get it done with combat. So for an army like Votann, where we've got lots of powerful but admittedly short range shooting, I think that helps with being able to clear people off objectives. And it does depend map to map. Some of the maps like Search and Destroy are an absolute dream for Votann because some of the sight lines you can scout into or on the first turn. So it's nice. If you set up nice and get the first turn, it's quite possible to have 2 big squads of 6-man bikes shooting into someone's deployment zone from the get-go.
Wow.
Into 2 units that you've double judged, so that's your CP and 2 things picked up if your opponent hasn't been careful. But particularly the Search and Destroy maps, I think are very good for Votann on UKTC.
Nice. I think that applies, honestly, even in, from what I've experienced, I think it applies very nicely on WTC as well for most maps. Like just if you get to infiltrate with your Jaegers on that like table quarter that's adjacent to you, and then you just get full control with your scout moves to stage and position turn 1. It's so nice. So it's good to hear that there are similarities in like what you're ultimately aiming to do that are transferable between terrain sets. But yes, I definitely would agree. Looking at these pictures, I'll put some up on the screen here for people that might be unfamiliar. It looks like you have good access to very long firing ranges. Like I think I see here for primary Purge the Foe and I think it's Crucible where the line goes from the bottom. Yeah, like right down the middle, you can see all 3 objectives, which
there's
is
some
pretty
scary,
cool.
Some scary spots to stand in.
Yeah.
The big time. And in the UK, I think we play pretty much an even mix of WTC and UKTC. almost no comp events around here that I play use GW terrain. So that's
Interesting.
I think
Okay.
one of the big differences. It's the so I do find they're not too dissimilar from WTC, but the GW ones when I do play on do feel quite different as an experience.
Yeah, yeah. We so at our store we use WTC pretty much exclusively, but we're starting to shift into GW, and I'm not familiar with it at all. So it's been a huge learning curve. Like it's been a cool experience to see just how much the game changes based on the terrain you're playing on. It because it does have a big impact. I've found going from
Yeah,
WTC to
massively.
GW. It's huge.
I agree. I agree.
All right, Tom. So, why don't you kick things off by walking us through your list?
Yeah, so it's quite a simple one to walk through, I guess, because I'm not taking too many data sheets.
Yeah.
I'd like to say I have problems with quite a few Votann data sheets. They
Hmm.
just don't quite click and work for me,
Yeah.
particularly the some of the heavier infantry, which you'll find completely lacking from my list. So there's
Yeah.
no Terminators and there's no Thunderkin because
Hmm.
I find them a little bit slow.
Yep.
And I think that's
Totally.
coming from Drukari, where like even my infantry moves like 8 inches, but the 5 inch movement combined with particularly for the Thunderkin, the short range, I find that as I'm on top tables, they just get screened out.
Yep.
They
Yep.
never quite get where they need to be. They're never that application of force where I particularly need it. And then they're particularly with an Iron Master and Grim Demeanor, they can do good work, but it's getting them in the right place at the right time, even if
Hmm.
you're rapid ingressing them. So it's yeah, I'm not a massive fan of either the Terminators or the Thunderkin for their points right now. So we have just a lone character to start in my list because you have to have a warlord. But
Hmm.
if I couldn't, I probably wouldn't even bring him. But the appraising glare is worth the money. So he sits in my back line, helping to screen and do actions, and in the late game can maybe even be committed as a little bit of a smash captain.
Hmm.
But the appraising glare is the money maker for him for sure. Uh, and then we
Absolutely.
have a huge core of battle line, which I think is essential to the philosophy of the list of playing that MSU. So we just want to out trade people, and when we do win the trades, we want to make sure we sticky those objectives. So I bring in 30 warriors, and they're all slightly differently equipped. So I think it's they all do a slightly different job. I have a
Yes.
more aggressive squad that has the three kin weapons, which I know 6 attacks at strength 6 doesn't sound very impressive, especially if you're like a Blood Angels player. But the with judgment tokens, they can punch all right, and they're usually for getting a little bit more aggressive and trying to deny some primary at some point in the game.
Hmm.
And the other two squads have a shooting loadout. One sort of plink wounds off vehicles with the rail rifle and the missile launcher, and the other one has sort of a fairly standard plasma and the las repeater gun that
Yes.
gets
Yeah.
6 shots. And then to transport all of those lads, because 30 dudes is quite a lot. To transport them and double the number of activations that they get, we bring 6 Sagittars, and we touched sort of briefly on conversations of casino cannon versus missile launchers, but I firmly believe that as you're in the realm of like 6 Sagittars,
Hmm.
they can be swingy with the casino cannon, which is the high las. Sorry for anyone that I've just been calling it the casino cannon, but
Yeah. I
with
think
the
everybody's
sustained
familiar with the
yeah
term.
the sustained D3 can pop off, and seeing people's faces when my little Sagittar can potentially do like 40 plus wounds in an activation.
Yeah.
People do respect it, and when you're bringing mass volume of them for 6 of them, so 12 shots in a turn if they're all alive and can all see something, the dice does start to even out a little bit more.
Hmm.
So that the more of them you bring, the less deviation from the average you're going to see. So I do like, if you're committing to Sagittars, bringing them all with the casino cannon.
Yeah.
And they weren't super crazy this weekend for me. I didn't roll much sustained other than one game against the Tyranids, where I had one shooting phase where just 3 sets of double 6 turned 3 big monsters into ash. But
Nice.
I found them fairly consistent as opposed to playing with like I'd maybe had 3 or 4 Sagittars in the list and noticeably less games where they just feel flat the whole time.
Hmm. I think that makes a lot of sense. So I can't even recall if we said this before we went live. We were talking about the 3 damage gun versus the high lies, and I basically have the same opinion as you do. I think ultimately, it's nice on paper having that extra range, having the consistency. You know, okay, I need 3 damage to go through here. This could pick something up. But I think fundamentally, in a game where math is a core aspect of it, and the dice, I think sometimes you just kind of need that ambiguous threat of, hey, this one tank can potentially do 40 damage if you come out, instead of saying, yeah, like I just do 3
Yeah.
flat.
Be worried.
Yeah, be worried, like
Yeah,
respect this. I have 6 of them. Now you got to really respect them. So
and once you hit someone with that 2 sustains up into like 7 or 8 hits, they really will respect
yeah,
the Sagittars after they've
yeah,
seen them pop off. Because that D6 damage can be really wild as well. But
absolutely, yeah.
yeah, so alongside the like MSU core of 30 warriors and the 6 Sagis, I also bring 3 berserkers for a little bit of counterpunch. These guys are great at beating up a lot of what's in the meta right now, especially the mauls with the 3 damage. But I do bring a squad of axes, because without the Terminators and the Thunderkin, Votann can be almost like a leaf blower faction sometimes with all the blast weapons that they're great at clearing infantry.
Yeah.
I do like 1 axe squad to be not only really reliable into marine bodies, but they also have that sweep profile if I come into Imperial Guard or
Yes,
AdMech or
yes.
something where there's just a bunch of 1 wound dudes that, with some judgment tokens, get absolutely scythed down by
Yeah,
the axe berserkers.
32 attacks on the sweep profile, and you could bump the AP up with the strat. It's
That's the thing
absolutely
as well.
nasty.
And I know some people say, well, with the axes, what if you come into -1 damage and stuff like that? It's really useful having the 3 damage. In a pinch, if you bump the AP on the sweep, 30-something attacks does all right into -1 damage, Deathwing Knights and stuff anyway, if they've got some judgment tokens on them.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of 1 axe mixed in. I bring 20 Jaegers, which I actually think is a little bit of the secret sauce of the list. It's that flexibility in the midboard from the get-go, and the ability to protect your scout everywhere. And the move block is so crucial for some of these games. So we'll talk about it as we get into it. But when I played the Tyranids, I managed to make sure that the Norns couldn't quite get onto objectives on turn 1.
Nice.
A turn shooting at the Norns without the feel no pain is so important, and really changes how durable they are, especially as a bit of a stat checklist. But
absolutely.
Yeah, so I think the 2 Jaegers in the midboard just lets me, I can be defensive with one or really pressure with the other, or they can both get chucked right in the middle for, people that maybe aren't prepared for that, and lists that are more susceptible to move block. But I think by far the most important pieces of the list were the bikes for me.
Okay.
So I was bringing 1 3-man bike squad that does, some actions and uppy downy, and that's great. But particularly without bringing like a land fortress to bring sort of that mass ignores cover damage too. Yeah, 2 big 6-man bike squads that I usually play quite conservatively, that then can come on and dominate the late game trading when, we have sort of turn 1 and 2 where the bikes can't really use their maneuverability to the fullest, because they can't come in from the opponent's deployment, and turn 1 they can't come in at all, obviously. But as units have started to be whittled down, and that initial trade has happened, maybe I've swapped a couple of 5-man warrior squads for some of the opponent's chaff, and they're having to expose their real and important units, then the bikes can pick up, come down on an angle, and take advantage of the exposed units to get a really nice favorable trade. And when you slap the sustained 2 on them, they really do punch up well.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think they're probably the most important bit of the list, beyond that initial trading force of the 6 Sagis with warriors and berserkers to counterpunch.
Nice. Okay, so I have a few thoughts on the list. Now, firstly, I'll say I completely agree with you on the Thunderkin. Now, the Thunderkin, we're starting to kind of see a few of them make an appearance inside of some of the high-end lists. And
some people swear by them. There's another fantastic Votann player down in Brighton, Tom Green. I think we're both currently ranked like 3 and 4 on the UK Votann rankings. But he swears by the 6-man Thunderkin with the Grim Demeanor Ironfather. And I can see the thinking, but they're not for me.
I can't get them to work. Like, they just get screened too easily. And like you said, right, it's like, it's the most predictable threat range in the game. It's like, oh, you land 9 inches away, and then your gun is 18 inches. Okay, like, I'm going to just stay X distance away from you, and it's like, okay,
What's that? You've got an enormous footprint and you can only come 5 inches onto the board.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Like, yeah.
And like
So
the one game I had them actually make it and connect with, I think it was like a repulsor executioner or something. They shot into it and they couldn't kill it, and it's like this is the one job you have and you can't do it. I don't
Do you
know,
know what?
man.
I actually find that at least when I've seen them played, they're really good as one, an Overwatch threat.
Hmm.
But for clearing out, when you whack that grim demeanor on them, the strength 5 and 2 damage into like marine bodies, they are fantastic again, leaf blowers for like sweeping away enemy
Yes, yeah,
infantry. But
yeah.
yeah, with the prevalence of like cover and armor of contempt, you can quite easily end up shooting into 2-up saves against vehicles, can't you, with
Yes,
them?
yeah, absolutely. I think personally too. We're going on a bit of a tangent, but I think personally they need some kind of access to ignore cover. Whether that's the Iron Master gets reworked to have each one of the drones add like some kind of a benefit, and then as you apply your ablative wounds and you take away models, you lose some of those benefits. Kind of like
Yeah,
that's like thematic with what we have going on. It's always like one model who provides the ignore cover. I could see that happening. I think it'd be fine. But yeah, I totally agree with you. Like on paper, they're like, chef's kiss, so good. Like strength 5, blast, -2 damage, and then in practice, it's like cover, armor, contempt, 0 damage. So I don't know.
yeah.
I don't see it. So I understand why they're not here. The Terminators. So the Terminators, they have such a special place in my heart, but I completely understand why they aren't in this list. They kind of go against the whole, from what I understand, they go against the whole philosophy of what you're trying to run here,
They
which is
really
just
do,
really cheap,
unfortunately.
efficient units. Yeah, they're just too expensive. Yeah.
And do you know, I had even played around with versions of the list with 5-man squads of them,
Mm-hmm.
and I love the Terminator models. They look fantastic, I think. And yeah, I'd love to be running like 20 of them in 2 big bricks. And maybe if some of the data slate reworks are true and the army rule is slightly different and that Terminator detachment is a little bit more playable, I'll
Yeah.
be able to get some games down at the club with them. But at the moment, with the way everything works, I think the Terminators are too many points and they're just not tough enough. With the nerf to Armor of Contempt, I think has been both a blessing and a curse for Votann because it
Mm-hmm.
means that the big bike squads, stuff that would normally just Armor of Contempt and shrug them off all turn, if you commit both into, you can now chew through some pretty serious stuff with. But particularly for the Terminators and the Land Forts, losing that Armor of Contempt throughout a whole turn
Yeah.
has dropped their durability. And there's so much 2 damage about that you can have, even with the -1 to wound, 10 of those Terminators picked up shockingly quickly. And it's
Absolutely.
they're too expensive to trade efficiently with that point. So they don't really have a place in a list like mine, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. It makes sense. So the other thing that I thought was really interesting was the different loadouts on the warriors. So this, I like, in all honesty, we don't really ever see this level of flexibility inside of the battle line in other lists. This level of thought put into like, okay, like one squad is going to be my designated X unit, and then this squad is going to be good at doing this. So I thought this was a really unique and interesting twist on what we usually see, where people just kind of like copy paste the same 2 weapons, which would be the high las assault gun and then the other high las kill team gun, the heavy version. So I thought this was pretty interesting. What led you to make this choice?
Uh, I think for me, at least my philosophy of the game is, and I guess this maybe segues into a larger conversation about the list, but I feel like you should have a plan coming in. I know what my deployment's going to be, almost regardless of who I'm playing,
Nice.
just from map to map. And I feel like your first couple of turns, you should, at least have a solid structure of how they're going to play out. So those slightly more specialized roles for the squads. When you're running 30 warriors, they don't all have to be the same things, and particularly that kin weapon squad that allows the warriors to be a little bit more aggressive and to, something that can charge into
Mm-hmm.
enemy objectives. And, they're not going to kill loads, but they might beat up a scout squad and then stand 10 OC on there. So
Yeah.
I do like the extra little bit of, I guess not even flexibility, but specialization for those squads. But one of the big things switching from Drukari to Votann was I feel like the the mental load is a lot less. And I have found over sort of 5 or 6 games over a weekend, the drain on me from playing Votann is very different from playing Drukari.
Okay.
I feel like I have so much more energy on that second day because there's less. Like we said, I think a little bit earlier, I'm playing against the scoreboard. I know where everything's going. I know what the job is. I'm fully confident that I'm never going to run out of time on the clock, despite playing quite an MSU playstyle with a lot of activations, because it all has a fairly descript job just from the list building. So even the berserkers, you'll see that I have 2 counterpunch high damage squads, and then another that can be there to clear chaff or be go aggressively into marine profiles. So knowing where everything's place is, and that is the ancestor cores micromanaging, I guess, but knowing what job everything's supposed to do helps with the list almost playing itself for me. I have to make very few decisions throughout a game because I know we're going to trade over the mid board, and I'm going to try and push the line of battle as close to your deployment zone as possible. And from there, we just continue applying pressure on both of those fronts. We want to take space and move block, and we want to trade aggressively into the mid board and deny primary where we can. So, I feel like everything has a spot in its list, and I know what it's all supposed to do, and that's probably where the extra level of customization for the warrior squads comes in.
Okay, I think you touched on 2 very important things in this conversation that I think are honestly the best pieces of advice I could give people, and that I think people could take away. And that's the plan for deployment. Like, just fundamentally, like as you put it, if you have a plan going in, like you don't even, for 90% of your deployment, you don't really need to consider like what army you're playing against. You can map that out and then adjust and tweak as you need. Like against world eaters, obviously you're gonna change it up a bit with your screens, but having like a plan going into the game already, like knowing what you're trying to do, knowing what your game plan is and how to actually achieve a win is just massive. Like just telegraphing, like you said, playing against the game instead of like the points, right? Instead of the opponent. It's like, how can you position yourself turn 0 in deployment to be able to score basically any secondary that you get, to be able to basically move block and deny primary for your opponent, and then get yourself on an objective. And it's like, at that point, you're kind of like solving a puzzle about the game itself, which takes me to my second point that I think you brought up quite well, which is that you feel less tired playing Votann. And I think that is because Votann is an army that really plays the fundamentals of the game and rewards you for being good at the fundamentals. I really feel that ultimately, especially with this list here, you have all the tools you need to play a good game of Warhammer. And if you do that, you win the game. And I really, really like that a lot about your list. And I think also what I've noticed personally in my games is unless somebody makes like a really big mistake, the scores are always, for Votann anyway, I find like they're relatively close. The games, like you'll never, if you lose, it'll never be a blowout loss unless you really messed up, like you made a mistake. And then same thing for your opponent, unless they really make a mistake, like a serious one. And I think that just supports that idea you said of like you're kind of playing against the points. Like you are designing your list and your opponent's kind of just trying to stop you from from scoring. You just keep scoring.
Yeah, and I think like you said, the big thing is reps and being confident in your deployment, and that plays into the mental fatigue, right? Because you're like, I know how I'm setting up. I don't have to give a load of brain power to considering this, and that is the sort of thing that even without loads of games in a week, you can just practice on TTS or something similar. Just going, you know the maps ahead of time. How am I going to set up? Let me try fitting this on, because particularly with 6 Sagis, if you do go in and just drop them down, you don't want to end up in a parking lot situation where you're not getting the most out of all your scout moves, and you're not able to hide everything turn 1, so someone maybe gets easy pickups on you if you don't go first, and there wasn't enough space to scout everything back into cover. So I think practicing your deployments and the way you want the first turns to go is a really good way for people that are maybe interested in becoming more competitive players. Just practicing reps of those, that almost like you would if you played chess for openings. What the game plan at least for the first couple of turns is going to be, and where everything needs to be set up for that. And I think that, particularly if you're playing on a clock, can really help with the speed of decision making.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. And like you said, it's so funny because a lot of people will go with like, oh, I don't really have time to play multiple times a week. I barely get one game in per week. And this is actually a skill that you can practice independently. You don't even need a table. You could just pull up a picture of the map. Like I do that on Paint or
Yeah,
on Canva for like my recap videos. That I literally practice doing my deployment when I have the map pack available beforehand on those maps, and it's like a tremendous difference. Like absolutely massive difference. The best games I've ever played were games where I got to practice my deployment beforehand and just show up to the table and you know exactly what you're doing.
yeah, exactly. And I think that's the strength of Votann, isn't it? Especially a list like this, that you can come in with a plan. Because with Drukari, the plan was sort of like, I'm gonna pounce on your mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
Votann, you can be a lot more structured, and you have the tools to play an extended trading game. Like, yeah, you might come up against loads of indirect potentially, maybe people
Mm-hmm.
running whirlwinds or guard, but with T5, you're fairly durable against the Imperial Guard mortars,
Yeah.
and even a whirlwind, unless they're oathing your 5-man warrior squads, aren't particularly susceptible to getting wiped out in one activation. So
Yeah.
you will have tools to be putting things on mid-board objectives turn after turn, while Sagittars and bikes and berserkers try and inflict a little bit of damage just to make sure that you're pushing your advantage in the trade war wherever you can.
Nice. Uh, okay, so I just had a couple more questions, and then we can move on to talking about the matchups, and you can take us through them. So next one would be about the double Jaeger. So you said that you found this was pretty instrumental in a lot of games for having more
Yeah.
flexibility turn one to move block or just to stage and get like board presence, take up space. So I'm just wondering, I have found often, like, people are usually fighting for space in no man's land, turn one with the infiltrators. I usually always get like one good spot in because it's alternating turns. Somebody puts something, takes up half the board. Your turn, you take up the other half of the board. So I'm just wondering, like, how was this for you in your games, like having double infiltrators into armies that also have an infiltrator, for example?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of secret sauce because most armies, even if they do bring some infiltrate, are only bringing one unit.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to get sort of 2 out of 3 chunks of the table. So ideally, right, we protect our own scout move first and
Mm-hmm.
drop some Jaegers over on by my natural expansion objective just to make sure that I don't get gummed up and potentially move blocked and
Yeah.
not able to secure you sticky and secure that natural expansion objective early. So we protect there, and then your opponent maybe drops in the middle or on the side, and you drop wherever that isn't, or you can be really conservative and sort of double stack and really secure that one flank. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, against some factions without any infiltrate, like the orc list that I played, he'd gone all in on breakers and tank busters, and the orc infiltrate units are quite expensive. You either have to bring Snicker who's a single model,
Mm-hmm.
or splash out like 120 points. Like, it's nearly as much as a predator
Yeah.
for a squad of commandos. And so in that game, you'll see that the score is really quite separate. It's a big difference. I think it was about 100 to 50.
Okay.
And I guess we're sort of getting into talking about that first game, but without any counter infiltrate, I just move blocked him. The trucks couldn't go anywhere to
Mm-hmm.
get these scary units with their indirect mortal wounds out into the midboard. And it was terraform. So I got an early push up and a massive early move block and terraform all 3 in the middle before he can get any OC
Oh my
or,
God.
into the midboard,
Yeah.
and just the game is already over. It's a very demoralizing point to be in for an opponent, realizing that at the bottom of turn, really when you lose the roll off to go first, that the game is already slipping away from you.
Oh
So
my.
it's, you said that Votann, we either lose small or we win small. The double Jaegers mean that into some matchups we can win really big. And some of these guys are never going to get off the starting blocks against us. And with how fast we are turn one and the move block capability of 20 dudes, that not only are they going to infiltrate, but they've then got a reactive move to be even more annoying
Mm-hmm.
in the next turn when you're trying to clear them. It means that people that are unprepared for that can really suffer. And if there are lots of infiltrate, there's loads of striking scorpions or scouts or stuff in the
Mm-hmm.
midboard, you can be a little bit more conservative And if your opponent has committed a lot of resources to the midboard early, there's potential to maybe double judge one of those squads and pick up an easy kill turn one for the extra CP. So I don't mind if someone wants to commit heavily to the infiltrate drops back and forth. There's the odd scenario where someone will have a redeploy and be able to yoink them back. But most of the time, it just means with the amount of scout that we get and the early midboard presence, they're giving me early pickups, you know?
Okay, I see. That makes a lot of sense. And I think we're going to look at a very good example when we talk about the Orc game. So I guess we'll transition to that now. I just had one more thought I just wanted to share that I thought was interesting. So the double six-man bike squad, you said you use a little bit more defensively. And I think that's quite interesting because I know there was a recent interview that came out with Tim Schneider who was talking about his WTC double 10-man berserk bricks. And he's quite aggressive in most games with his six-man bikes. But I think that comes down to the list archetype, really, because what you're doing here is you're just out-resourcing your opponent in midboard with the resources that you have. And so there's no reason for you to overextend unless like there's really a good opportunity to do so. And if they come in response, then you just have a massive punchback with the bikes.
Yeah, and I don't really ever want to give the opponent early turns where they can trade up into me. So it's like, you know, we might have the Jaegers and two 50-point 5-man warrior units exposed. And you have to come and out OC me, and you have to kill some stuff. So you often, the opponent ends up overexposing, which you can then take advantage of. And so, yeah, the bikes for me are definitely late game bullies. And I have that early move block potential with the, you know, to like big presence in the midboard. I have 20 Jaegers. I don't need to be chucking a very expensive and frankly quite fragile for its points bike squad into the midboard to get picked up. And people know that they're, you know, when you rock up with a list like mine, people scan through it for damage. People know the bikes are you know, some of the only real hammer units I have beside the guys that literally have big hammers in the berserkers. So if you do push forward with them, people are going to prioritize them. And you know, there's a lot of 3 damage around in the meta at the moment that picks up, you know, bikes that only have a 4-up armor save shockingly quickly. So yeah, they're my late game bullies to drop, you know, serious firepower where I need, as well as just being able to, there's so many shots that they can sweep the chaff really well. So it's they're definitely more of a late game piece than that early pressure unit that they can be in different list archetypes.
Yeah, I agree. I think that makes a lot of sense, and that is completely sound. Okay, so Tom, I guess let's talk a little bit about your game path here at the event. It looks like so out of the 5 games, you ended up getting 5 wins into a bunch of different armies. And you spoke a little bit about Orcs. There's Imperial Knights, Space Marines, Tyranids, and then Space Marines again. So maybe you could take us through each game, and then we'll I'll share some thoughts, maybe some questions about them as we go through. So game 1 into Orcs.
Like we've said, the game 1 on Terraform into Orcs was basically over when I went first and move blocked them. I do think Tactical Orcs can be a hard matchup for Votann. They just hit so hard, and they got stealth out the wazoo. But we do have some tools that work well against them. Prioritizing the trucks early is really big to deny them their movement. And the bikes are really good at picking up those tank busters, flash gits, breaker boys, whichever variant of horrible big orc is running around with characters attached. The bikes ignore the stealth that they might have put on themselves, and then our profiles are so great into those 2 wound bodies with the bike magma cannons that really efficiently chew them up. So, and then the berserkers are also great in that matchup, as you know, trade really efficiently by charging into something and then fighting on death on the clap back. So I think definitely a big factor in this win, particularly it being so lopsided, was the early move block and the double Jaegers against an opponent that didn't have any infiltrate. So essentially over from the dice off for turn 1. All 3 objectives in the midboard terraformed, and we then fought basically over the line of his deployment zone as he tried to get really anything going throughout the rest of the game. So,
right, yeah, because at that point you could just feed him units, like just feed him resources. You've already won in the center. That's crazy.
The second game I was very worried about because the Toby, who's the lad I played, he's been at times the #1 ranked Knights player in the UK, so he knows his stuff with the faction. And I usually wouldn't be worried about knights with Votann, and we had played a couple of weeks earlier at the Beachhead Super Major,
Mm-hmm.
and I had beaten Toby there with a very similar knights list. But we
Okay.
were playing on Purge the Foe for Mission 2, which
Okay.
is horrific out for MSU
Yeah.
Votann into like 12 War Dog equivalents.
Yes. Yeah, I'm looking at
So
his list now. He had like what, 12 or 13 dogs. He had some breachers, a priest. He had some just like some chaff, and then he had a Sisters of Battle immolator. So that's pretty
yeah,
techy, and then he also has just like the stat check component.
yeah. The immolator strips cover, so those AP1 Helverins can suddenly do some good work. He's got that rogue trader that joins the Imperial agent breacher guys, which
Mm-hmm.
they can then infiltrate and redeploy. So they were able to deny a bunch of space because usually knights would be quite susceptible to that early wave
Yes,
block.
yeah.
But with 14 guys, they get a really big footprint for infiltrate denial. So I didn't get to stuff him up with the Jaegers in quite the way that I would have wanted. And even then, you have that conversation with yourself of, well, do I really want to be putting two Jaegers in the midboard for this game on Purge? Because
Mm-hmm.
if he just whittles them down, he can then kill them at his leisure for kill more later.
Yeah.
So this was a really tough one where I had to really carefully manage my assets and yeah, I did go second. So playing for that end turn and seeing where his kill unit numbers were
Mm-hmm.
and just picking him at the post. But really close game. Fantastic opponent as always. Toby, like I said, he's really high ranked in the ITC rankings for knights in the UK, and he really is a specialist with that army. So it's always a tough out.
Nice. So I spoke last week with Ronnie Kinney, who had played in Cherokee, and one of his most so he also had like a kind of MSU list as well. And one of his challenges that he said was purge the foe, of course, naturally, because you have small units that die super fast to big things. And what he said that was interesting, of course, was like he knew going into it he would lose basically all the kill mores every round,
Yes.
but he would get all the hold mores every round with all the stuff he had. So it kind of evened out. Was that kind of your experience here as well?
With knights being enormous 8 OC bodies, he can. It's very difficult to consistently get hold more because they can just swarm that natural expansion objective with like
Mm-hmm.
2 or 3 knights for like 16 plus OC,
Yeah.
and then deny you in the middle by just going and standing like 8 OC models on there if you've got anything other than a full warrior squad.
Yeah.
So it's very easy on the purge for knights to make sure that you're not
Mm-hmm.
hold more consistently. So I actually found that I played very conservatively and let him push forward, and then did manage to get kill more on my go turn where I really committed across the board and just threw the kitchen sink at everything. So both bite squads are coming out to shoot
Yeah.
at knights. Both hammer berserkers are going in. The bloody smash captain is coming out of the ruins and getting involved as well. Grenades are going off. I've been saving my CP so I can tank shock and reroll D6 damage as much as possible. So
Nice.
I
Nice.
did get I got the final turn and another turn before that of kill more, and then hold mores towards the end of the game as he was losing knights. But yeah, a
Interesting.
really tough
Okay.
one. And specifically, I knew this mission was going to be bad. And I think this is the luxury of being able to play a couple of times a week. I had been practicing Purge the Foe. I'd played about 3 practice reps of it on the 2 weeks on the run up because I
Okay.
knew that if any mission I was going to come unstuck, it would be Purge the Foe into
Hmm.
something like Knights. So I think being prepared for that matchup and knowing some of the list's inherent weaknesses, I was able to at least come in with a strategy for how we would try and make the most of a bad situation.
Nice. Okay. Nice. That seems like a solid plan here, and good to see that it worked. A very tight game, like
Only
you said.
just.
But yeah, that's where the practice comes in, just knowing your list, knowing your game plan, and just going into it prepared. Because I would imagine this would probably hurt a lot of other armies, or even your own army, if you came in without much practice into specifically this matchup on this mission type, which is a little bit painful.
Yeah, and I think that's just partly doing your due diligence of if it all goes wrong and there's one matchup and that I really don't want to see, or one mission that I'm less confident on, don't just go and practice take and hold or linchpin because they're a bit easier to set up. play the missions that you are apprehensive about. And reps is one of the biggest things with this game. And the more repetitions you get at those sticky situations, the better at handling them you'll become.
Yeah, yeah, well said. Okay, so we go next into game 3. And this one is into Ultramarines, Ironstorm Spearhead. So this would be a matchup that I would usually dread to play into. I had played one game. This is my story that I share with everybody. I had played my first game after Grotmus detachments and like the Space Marine update came out. I had played my triple land fort list into Ultramarines.
Oh boy.
And yeah, and I was like, yeah, time to shelve the land forts. And I was like, my takeaway from that was like, oh my god, this game is super lethal now, and I don't think land forts can survive against this army. But then at my recent event that I played,
AOC changes.
yeah, it was the AOC changes hurt it. The +1 to wound, like them having our army rule twice a turn hurts, and yeah, like I had played at a team event, one of the more recent weekends that just passed, and I got paired into Ultramarines. Admittedly, it wasn't Ironstorm, it was Gladius. And a very similar list to the one I'm looking at here, except he had much fewer like trading resources. So he didn't have any assault intercessors with jump packs. He did have just like a couple scout squads, an infiltrator squad, and some intercessors, and just a bunch of tanks. And so I'm really curious to hear your experience on how you analyzed this game, how you came up with a game plan. Because I was running a similar like 30 warrior list, and my game plan going in was I just need to like out trade him in the first 2 turns, get his like little pieces out of the way, and then all he's left with are tanks, and then those tanks are going to have to make inefficient decisions throughout the rest of the game because he has to do secondaries, he has to get on objectives, he won't be able to play optimally. And that ended up being the swing in my favor is that game plan, which worked out. So I'm super curious to hear your experience into this army, how you approached it.
I think that last little bit from you sums it up. We can outtrade these sorts of lists, particularly when you're running. You found you could outtrade it with a land fort list, particularly if you pivoted into MSU and it's like, oh no, you're going to be +1 to wound my Sagittar. I have accepted any Sagittar I expose is probably going to get got on the clapback.
Yeah.
I'm not bothered if you judge 2 of them. It's fine. And my list has the resources that on your go turn, I can lose 2 Sagittars. In a way, you can't lose 2 land fortresses and then still play the game as you'd like to. So it means that, particularly, we were playing on Search and Destroy, Take and Hold. I was very confident in being able to outtrade consistently throughout the game on this one. So yeah, I'd say that I was almost salivating with anticipation coming into this, knowing that. And I like to play with confidence and visualizing the win. But I was very assured in this one coming in that I was going to pick up a good showing and a strong win against the list, particularly on the mission. And that, yeah, I was just going to be able to force trades until he was having to put the tanks that he'd like to be hiding into the midboard, where they can then get picked up by berserkers and casino cannons. And yeah, the list has teeth. The whirlwind in Ironstorm is very annoying.
Yes.
And I would urge people to watch out for it, because it can, if you've taken even a little bit of chip damage with how much CP the Ultramarines generate, they can slap the ignores cover and sustained on it with the, all the rerolls for Oath and the +1 to wound. Suddenly it becomes quite a nasty piece. So I would say don't underestimate a whirlwind, particularly in the Ironstorm detachment. If there's 2 judgments, 2 Oath opponents flying about. But yeah, beyond that, very confident that I would just be able to outtrade the list. My biggest worry was the whirlwind picking up so many little 5-man squads over the course of the game. But fortunately, 4-up Invuns and 5-up Feel No Pains on the Berserkers held out. And yeah, I was able to score really well and again push the line of battle further towards his deployment zone than mine and just outtrade him throughout the game.
Nice. Okay, cool. So I find it very funny because my game at the event into Ultramarines was also on Search and Destroy, Take and Hold. And after rolling, like I did my deployment, then after rolling off, I got second. I was like, oh yeah, okay, now we're good. Now we're fine. totally fine, in the bag. I found the 3-man bikes actually to be my MVP in this match. I only had one 3-man bike unit, but that thing was reliably every turn picking up a scout squad, picking up an infiltrator squad. It's easier to fit because it's only 3 bodies, smaller footprint, and you pop sustained hits 2 on it, and it does actually pick up like a 5-man squad of Marines with the ignore cover.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I think that is the, when you're playing a style of list like that wants to trade aggressively, having pieces to pick up your opponent's trading units is key. Being able to pick up, 5 Marines at the drop of the hat, or, the high las guns on the bikes with some shotgun pellets mixed in, picks up like 20 bits of chaff. I think that's really important. And in my, when I used to play Drukari, that was the bomber's role. Because just like the bikes, the bombers are, able to move around and get line of sight, particularly the way aircraft line of sight works in 10th, and dump a load of anti-marine shots. The bomber gets something like, I think it's 12 strength 9 AP4 shots, which they're almost certainly re-rolling with a pain token, as well as a couple of missiles and some mortal wounds from the bomb. So very reliable at picking up a couple of marine, 5-man marine squads a turn, and just denying the opponent resources for that trade war. So they have to start committing the more expensive things that they know are going to trade inefficiently. So I think that's a big part of getting the most out of that style of list.
Nice. Okay, so we move on then. Day 1, a very nice success, 3 wins, clean. We go into day 2, and you're up against Tyranids, Crusher Stampede, which looks to be, from what I see here, a bit of a stat checklist. We have 3 big Norns, couple Exocrines, a Maliceptor for the -1 to hit aura, 2 Tyrannofexes, and then a couple little secondary pieces like some Leapers and Lictor, Biovores, things like that. So how did this game go for you?
Well, like you said, this is very much a stat checklist that pushes the durability with those 3 Norns. Usually, I'd seen a couple of my opponent's games earlier in the weekend. He was putting 2 Norns on the same objective in the middle, so that the middle was, when they're not wounded, that's something ridiculous like 34 OC on like 2 quite hard to kill bodies. So I knew stopping them getting there was important, but you can't really stat check Votann because I'm going to double judge those 3 Norns, obviously, and then something else. It was the Maliceptor, but yeah, all 3 Norns are getting judged, and that means they're getting beaten up. Particularly because, like we said, I was able to deploy the Jaegers in a way that the Crusher Stampede can give move through walls, but you still have to be able to fit the base.
Yeah.
So I was able to just flood the middle objective that he wanted to stand on with Jaeger bodies, so that in the movement phase he couldn't put the Norn on them. And so the mid sort of nullifies that strat a little bit. Meant that with the move block, I got a turn of shooting off at the Norns before they had their feel no pain, but I think fundamentally for this matchup, I was in a really good spot because you just are going to struggle to stat check a Votann list. So I didn't feel like I had too much trouble into the Tyranids.
Yeah. So I think this is interesting because, so for myself, as someone who's kind of just starting in the competitive scene, like starting to attend bigger events and things like that, I think one of the bigger realizations I had, like one of the most important skills I would say, is not just like ensuring you have good tempo in the game, but it's actually like slowing down your opponent's tempo as well. And if there's a way for you to stop, like give them a 5, give them a 10, like just slow them down for even 1 turn with like as few resources as you have, that could win you the game right out the gate. And I think that that's incredibly important. And like you said, like using these cheap 90-point Jaegers who are obviously going to die, that's their goal, but to stop a Norn emissary from landing on an objective is crazy value. Just like absolutely insane. Slowing the game down, just that 1 turn gives you such a good advantage, such a good edge. And then, like you said, you're able to pick them up a little bit easier, which plays into it. But I think that's absolutely well said. Just managing the pace of the game, I think is a good way to say it. With those, like you said, that hidden sauce, the double Jaegers, you just get a little bit more of that forward pressure in no man's land to play around with your opponent's ability to navigate the table.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. And we didn't talk about this beforehand, but you couldn't have set up the final game any better, because it's a slightly strange skew mission of Scorched Earth.
Okay.
And my philosophy with Scorched Earth is if you can get even, really only as the second player, but I was going second in the game. If you can get one primary denial off early, knowing that you're banking on that last turn,
Hmm.
you are almost set to win the game. So long as you can, score consistently like Votann can. So I was very confident coming into Scorched Earth, and it was a very hard game against Bloodless Angels, which are all the
Yeah.
rage at the minute. I don't know
Yeah.
if you saw they took first and second at the Manchester Super Major up
Yeah.
north from me, but the list is horrible.
This is a scary list.
Partic-
I'm looking through it now. It's
Particularly,
terrifying.
you know, I'm running MSU Votann. They skirmish so hard.
Hmm.
Those little 5-man Incursion squads or whatever they're called, the guys with the haywire grenades that
Yes.
you know they pop up, drop 5 mortal wounds on a Sagittar and charge you, and then they so nonchalantly turn around and say, "Oh yeah, that's going to be like 25 strength 6 attacks with
Yeah.
sustained."
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you mix in Oath with that as well, they're just very efficient at that skirmish game that I'm trying to play in the midboard with them. So I knew I was in for a bit of a tough time. There's a lot of nasty tanks with the Predators and the Vindicators,
Hmm.
but I did know, and my opponent did make a mistake with his deployment, maybe being a little bit. I think maybe he underestimated how efficiently I was going to be able to threaten his uh, natural expansion.
Okay.
But I did manage to get that combat squad of warriors and the axe berserkers charging onto stuff on his expansion objective turn one after an aggressive scout, and the Jaegers buying them some space. And I was able to deny his primary turn one, which meant that with bottom a turn,
Hmm.
being able to burn objectives slightly more at my leisure and score at the end of the game, I sort of knew I'd won at that point. But basically, everything that could have gone wrong after that did go wrong. My secondary draw was awful. The Marines hit massively hard into the center, and I
Yes.
traded with them just like anything. But they are scary, and there's a big squad of Blade Guard would fight first that I thankfully got the bikes lined up into and chewed them up pretty quick. But
Nice.
yeah, it was a really tough game against a good opponent that was also on the top table for the last game of the weekend. And
Hmm.
those bloodless Blood Angels are nasty. They skirmish so well. I think is the real key to that list is
Yeah.
they get such great value out of really cheap units that it means that they just trade more efficiently than you're maybe expecting, or
Hmm.
at least more efficiently than I was expecting in places. So they certainly have the abilities to surprise you and to score really well. But then there's huge damage with the new Space Marine Oath and Predators and Vindicators at the wazoo.
Yeah, I agree. Like I'm looking at the list now, it's absolutely terrifying. So just for the viewers here, we have a bunch of captains, chaplain, yada yada. We have an assault intercessor squad. We have 3 jump pack intercessors, a 6-man blade guard, an incursor, an infiltrator, a scout, a stern guard brick. We have outriders. We have ballistas, dreadnoughts, predators, vindicators, and then an impulsor, of course, to transport the blade guard. So a scary list, a lot of pieces, trades very well, like you put it, Tom. And I, I haven't had the displeasure of yet playing against bloodless Blood Angels, so I'm still very naive in this matchup in terms of like the damage output that they have. But I can imagine just generally like Marines, this is tough. There's a lot of stuff here that's very fast. It hits very hard, and they do have the tools to match our trading capabilities and just get more favorable
Yeah.
trades on there. And so how? So I guess like it was super critical of you to deny that turn one. Like you identified like okay, you have bottom of the game on Scorch. That's a very nice swing for you at the end of the game if you can maintain your objectives and just kind of get even the smallest amount of a lead. And I really like that you said you decided to go super aggressive with the scout on the Sagittars to disembark and charge with the Berserks because this is something that I think catches a lot of people off guard. Is if we want to, as Votann, we could get in your DZ turn one on certain matches, on certain maps, and this throws a lot of people off. Like the ability, like you said, nobody will expect you to throw those units away turn one potentially, but if there's an opportunity for you to slow down your opponent's scoring potential, especially knowing that you get like the end of the game scoring, that's a massive swing if you could deny that.
Yeah. especially on Scorched Earth as well, where you are capped at sort of 2 objectives for
Yes,
most
yeah.
of the game. So it's very difficult to deny your opponent primary on that sort of setup. So yeah, like you said, being able to get aggressive with not just the Berserkers, but the 10 OC from the Warrior Squad as well,
Hmm.
which getting all of that on objectives. And I'm very practiced with Drukari of when I move my transports, they're always up against a wall, so that if
Hmm.
they do get popped, the lads can get out somewhere that's, or at the very least, if it's not behind a wall, is out of line of sight of follow-up shooting.
Yes.
So I'm quite well practiced at, even if you get the Sagittar, the lads inside are going to get a turn to do important stuff next turn. So yeah, like I said, I'm these are fast Votann. If you look at my list, everything either moves 12 inches on top of a scout move or is already in the midboard to start with the Jaegers. And yeah, there's some slightly slower guys that are riding in those transports, but we're making sure they get where they need to be, not only with the scout and the 12-inch movement, but I think quite an underutilized rule sometimes is that you can still get out of a Sagi after you've advanced it.
Hmm.
So they really can cover a lot of distance in turn 1 when you need them to.
Yeah, I think that is pretty cool. Like I said, we have all the tools to play like a very good game of Warhammer, and I think it just comes down to how comfortable you are as a pilot with the list itself, getting those reps in, getting that practice, and with the game itself. Like, how much do you understand the fundamentals? Like, knowing that the win path is on a mission where you can only score up to 10, denying 5, which is pretty impactful. So I think that just speaks volumes to how you piloted the list, how you played, and I think extremely well deserved win. Some really tough matchups, and I think you showed that you are well versed in the army, well versed in the list, and have a very solid understanding of how the game works to be able to pilot this to such success.
Yeah, I had loads of fun. It was a great event, and I'm sold on MSU Fast Votann completely, and I'm taking the same list to the South Coast Super Major, which is not next weekend, but the weekend after. So I'll have to let you guys know how that goes. But
Yes, yes,
yeah,
keep us posted.
I got a top 10 finish at my last Super Major. I'm hoping for the same again, or maybe even a couple of spots higher and top 5, and getting into those, the top of the top tables would be fantastic, and just building on some of the good results I've had already with Votann this year. But
Nice.
yeah, I think reps with the list is key, because if it does have one weakness, you can spread yourself too thin. There's a fine balance where you go from strong trading army that is has a massive footprint and a strong midboard presence, so you can push that a little bit too far, and the whole game starts to feel like butter spread across too much bread,
Yeah.
and you just thin on the ground everywhere, and you can't ever quite get enough focus fire, and even with grenades and tank shock, into key units to get kills where you need to. So there is ways to be overly aggressive with the list too
Hmm.
early, and leave yourself with too few pieces for the late game and making poor trades. So there's definitely, if you want to play this sort of list and you're not super familiar with an MSU style, it is one that I'd recommend getting a couple of reps in with before you take to an event.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Speaking from personal experience, so moving away from 3 Land Forts, 2 Sagittars to currently what I was running was 5 Sagittars that I started playing with now after my event had concluded. And I only had one game in with the list. I think there is a bigger learning curve for managing those resources effectively. Like, you have so many things, it's like, oh, like, that's fine. Like, I'm gonna just out resource my opponent no matter what. But if they do pick up like 2 things in one go with a single unit, now suddenly you're on the back foot. So you do have to be careful with resource management. I'm curious how you used, so like with the splits on the warriors. So like obviously you would only put a 5 man inside of the Sagittars, and then you would have like 3 by 5 on the board. One's on your home field, the other 2 are mid board. Do you use them kind of like? I guess it is probably matchup dependent. So that would be my question. Like, what are you looking for in terms of saying like, oh, like I'm gonna put a Sagittar on the objective with warriors inside, versus I'm gonna use my Sagittar as a rhino to throw squads of warriors out repeatedly on this objective instead.
For my 2 Sagis that want to play like the mid board, or even potentially my opponent's expansion,
Hmm.
they are there's 5 special dudes, with all the war gear and the
Yes.
ignores
Yeah.
cover and the feel no pain. They start in the Sagi for that aggressive turn 1 scout and presence in the midboard or over by your objectives expansion. But for my natural expansion, I quite like starting the Sagi behind cover with 5 normal dudes in there, because they then get an 8-inch plus an advanced movement onto my natural expansion objective, and the third and final squad of heavy weapons, which is usually the slightly longer range anti-tank, then get in the Sagittar that can then, position to take angles later in the game.
Nice. Okay.
But that extra little bit of movement on turn 1, just because with 5 inches and a bad assault, a bad advance roll, you don't always get onto that natural expansion objective depending on the map.
Yeah.
So just giving 3 inches extra movement for that first wave of chaff, getting up the board can be nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I guess you've already kind of answered this question, but any changes you would make to the list, any tweaks at all, or are you set on having this as the list you take to your next major?
I firmly believe reps are a big thing. We obviously have all sorts of rumblings of a balanced data slate coming as well. So on the run up to potentially big changes, I'm going to stick with what's been working, continue to get reps in with this MSU style, and then if there are big changes to come, we will take them into consideration when they pop up. But in that funny limbo period where we're waiting for new points, I try not to mess with things too much.
Yeah. Okay, I think that makes a lot of sense. And if we could go off history, I think we could assume what usually happens with Votann is we free up around 5 to 10 points per list, which means you can't do anything.
Hey, there's all sorts of talk that the judgments are moving to army rule, which would clean up detachments for us and future-proof some of the faction.
Yeah.
So yeah, potentially some exciting stuff to come. We will see though, because that's all just hearsay and gossip on the internet. Like you said, if we go historically, Thunderkin are going to drop 5 points, and the land fort's going to go up 5 or something. It's just enough to cancel each other out, or not quite be enough to afford a new enhancement for anybody. So
I think okay. So here I have an interesting question for you. I just thought of. So what kind of changes would you like to see on the data slate for Votann? What would be your wish list?
Do you know, I don't think just points would be enough for Votann for me. If I was going to take a look at some of those, like I said, some of those data sheets that just maybe aren't working out for the way they've been designed. Like we talked about Thunderkin and Terminators. So, we had initially, obviously, with Votann at the start of 10th, really struggled before they added the extra judgment tokens in. And that does help the army's reliability, but I think I'd be looking to make changes in terms of, like we said, maybe the Iron Father doesn't give +1 to hit anymore because we sort of have easy access to that already. Maybe he ignores cover, or the drones start to do something different. I'd like to see the Terminators go up to 3 wounds to be a little bit more durable. Maybe even start thinking about an invulnerable save for them, because one of my first encounters with Votann was playing my Drukari, and Lilith Hesperex goes up to like AP 4 in combat with a token, and she's anti-infantry 2+ with sustained 2 and rerolls. She she spiked a little bit, but I did do like 26 AP 4 wounds to this squad of Terminators with one model. That the poor man looked at me, and he it was early game, he didn't have the CP, and just pulled them off the board.
So you showed up to a table, absolutely demolished your Votann opponent, and you said, "Oh yeah, that's my next army."
Well, they were beautiful. This guy had kit bashed his whole. He was bringing 30 Terminators, and he'd kit bashed them all as like fun Ironkin, with
nice.
not just all the like Ironkin chrome domes, but also loads of little extra arms and bits and bobs coming off the back with the grenade launchers. So I just thought the army looked amazing. He had a super cool sort of Pterodon turquoise paint scheme, and I was like, do you know what? Even though I did kick their butt, I thought they were really cool. And I did think that Drukari were maybe a little bit of a bad matchup for them, with just how much easy access to super high AP and anti-infantry they have, so that they do sort of cut through the high toughness and the 2-up armor saves. But yeah, I'd like to see data sheets reworked. I'm a little annoyed that like the 2 codexes that aren't on the roadmap at the minute are Drukari and Votann. I would like to see some datasheet reworks for some of the stuff like, Grimnir's, Uthar the Destined, datasheets that just aren't seeing the tabletop at
Yeah.
all. And then some of the other ones like the Terminators and the Thunderkin that I feel could maybe be change the points and change the rules a little bit so that they, are a little bit more efficient or fun to play in spots.
Yeah, I agree. I have like medium expectations for the slate. It's been done before. GW has made big changes to armies on data slates, so it's not
Yeah, I
out of
mean,
the
I got
question.
Sky Splinter as a detachment,
Yeah,
as
which was
a extra
awesome.
detachment at one point, but
Yeah.
which was great. And Drukari at the start of 10th were really tough. It was basically I just brought 34 Dark Lancers to a game, and we saw how many how many of those would land. But the just cutting points for Votann, because I actually think the army's in quite a good place. I
Mhm.
think we trade super well. I think we're even quite good into like an Eldar and Guard meta. The
Yes,
Bloodless
yes.
Blood Angels are a bit of a problem with how well they skirmish, but I think we're well placed to do well at the minute. Uh, and if you would start cutting points to push the win rate closer or above 50, I think you get to a point where Votann can feel quite oppressive for
Hmm.
some armies. Where specifically this style of MSU, if you even gave me 100 extra points and there were two more sets of 5-man warrior squads to trade with, or it's just getting a bit gross for people to be able to clear that much OC that's T5 off the board. So
Yeah,
I don't
I
think I'd like to
agree.
see them get much more hordy. I mean, it would be nice, and I'd feel more confident into some of the top table matchups. But I think the issues with Votann are in the data sheets at the minute, and I'd like to see GW go through them with a scalpel and maybe clean some of the stuff from the index up.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. My expectations are the same like yours. I really hope, especially for the detachments, like I really, really hope they do. The rumors are true and that they move tokens to the army rule. Even if they plan on completely dismantling the token system when the codex comes out, that's in a year. So give us something to do right now,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
just give some life to the army, and hopefully we could play with our new detachment and it's actually competitively viable. I think all it needs is just a couple tweaks and like the data cards as well. Breathe some life
Yeah,
into some of these
it's
models
little
sitting on
stuff
the
like
shelf.
you can tell whoever wrote the new Votann detachment didn't actually play Votann,
Hmm.
because it's like, oh, well, they're maybe not going to get as many judgment tokens, but we'll encourage you to bring 3 Carls, and then you're giving out 3 judgment tokens every command phase, and it's like, no,
Yeah.
you're not. You're giving one out still,
Yep. Yep. And it's
which
in
is
the
like,
command phase, which
yeah,
just, oh my god, it's
exactly.
horrible.
So it's like, even if I bring 3 Carls, I'm still not giving out anywhere near enough tokens to play the game properly, because you end up in this funny spot, don't you, where you're like, I'm bringing like, whenever I write up a list for the new detachments, like,
Hmm.
man, I'm bringing like 700 points to feed to somebody. So
Yeah.
my like last 1,200 points, the maths is right for them.
Yep.
It's tough. The idea that you have to spend like the first 2-3 turns drip feeding resources
Yeah.
just to get things online, which usually I think that's one of our strengths. That if I'm going to drip feed you loads of little 5-man squads like my list is, and then you're going to accrue judgment tokens, but that that's great on top of the 4 judged units that we get for guaranteed.
Exactly. It
It's
protects
not
you
enough
against
just
like
on its
pressure
own.
lists, things like just beelining
Yeah,
you. It's a
and
contingency.
people have to kill my chaff in the midboard if I'm playing an MSU trade game, because
Yeah.
otherwise they concede the game and I win on points.
Yeah.
So they have to kill these little units, which means they have to pick up judgment tokens, just helping me be as efficient as possible
Yeah.
as the game goes on. But yeah, it's a fantastic faction. I think I said at the start, but I've been a massive fan of the channel and everything you've done. And yeah,
Thank you,
there's a
man.
big contingent of Votann players down in Brighton that, yeah, we all watch your channel and know of you. So it's super cool to come and be involved, and yeah, and get to chat a little bit.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, Tom. It's really kind of you to say. I try to I find like when I started Voltan, there was nothing out there, and I was like, oh, I need information. I need to learn more about this army. And I was like, I'll try just making something to talk about lists. At least we'll get like a discussion going. And I
Yeah.
never ever dreamed that the channel would get to where it is today, where I'm actually interviewing like incredible people around the world. I'm meeting and speaking with these amazing individuals like yourself and actually getting, in a lot of ways, I kind of get a lot out of these interviews personally too, because I get to learn different ways to play the army and like tricks that are working for you. And I think it's just awesome that people are interested to come on and share how they play the game. And I think a lot of people get a lot of information out of this, and it's super helpful. So thank you so much for wanting to come on and talk with me and share this knowledge with the fellow kin. I really appreciate it.
Really cool to be here. And yeah, even if it helps just one or two people, be slightly more efficient when it comes to the grinding our enemies beneath the wheels of industrial expansion, I'll be a happy man.
Absolutely. So, Tom, do you have anything going on? You had told me that you were part of a regular guest on a YouTube channel. Do you want to maybe share that with the viewers?
Epic Flail 40K. I sometimes play battle reports for. It's a fantastic channel. The guys, even if you're not interested in sort of the podcasty content, they stream the UKTC games. So if you any Canadians or Americans are interested in seeing games on the UKTC terrain and mission pack, the Epic Flail guys do go down, and they stream the UKTC, mainly the super majors, so the bigger events, but I find they're more interesting to watch anyway when there's a pool of 200-300 players. Mm-hmm. And they will be streaming the South Coast Super Major on the 22nd and 23rd of March. And, if everything goes well, you should hopefully see me on the top tables, maybe on one of those stream games. So
nice.
I'll share the link in the Discord for anyone interested so that people can watch the South Coast Super Major anyway. And fingers crossed, I might even grace the stream games myself.
Absolutely. Okay, great. I'm going to put a link to the channel in the description below, and I will put a reminder for everybody to tune in case you are live, because that would be an amazing experience to actually get to see you play.
If we get some Votann versus representation on one of the super major streams.
Yeah, let me know, and we'll pin it in the channel for everybody to see.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure. And yeah, do let me know if there's anything else that you'd like us, or maybe even some of the extended Votann Brighton community. I'll see if I can get pictures of the 10 different Votann armies we have down here.
That would be great. That would be awesome to see. If you do put them in the Discord, and I'm sure everybody would love to check them out. Tom, thank you again so much for coming on. I really appreciate you giving me some of your time today to just bring this information and this incredible insight to the channel and to everybody watching. I think you have a really good way of understanding the game that is completely captured in this list design, how you operate it, how you pilot it, how you play it. And I think it's very clear that as you design this list, everything is intentionally included to do a very specific job, and you understand and have the practice to know what that job is, and you pilot it to great success. So thanks so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. And for everybody watching, we'll have a link, of course, to the Epic Flail channel down in the description below, and a very good luck wish to Tom at the major coming up. We'll keep an eye on that, and maybe we'll get you in on another list review on the channel if you win that one too.
Yeah, that would be ace.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tom. Take care.
Cheers.
If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment for me down below. As always, a massive, massive thank you to our channel members whose support helps make these kinds of videos possible. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.